It was a warm morning in Orlando, the sun shining over the streets as people hurried to work. Aramis had just finished a long meeting at her office and was driving home, thinking about the cases waiting on her desk. She was calm, listening to soft music, her car windows slightly open to let in the fresh air. The traffic was light and everything seemed peaceful. Her car, a black sedan with a government plate, was in perfect condition. She followed every rule, stopped at red lights, and kept her eyes on the road. There was no reason for anyone to stop her. But just as she turned onto a quieter street, she saw something that made her heart skip a beat, flashing red and blue lights in her rearview mirror. For a moment, she thought maybe the police were after someone else. She looked around, but there were no other cars nearby. The lights were meant for her. Confused, she slowed down and pulled over to the side. Her fingers tightened around the steering wheel as two police officers stepped out of their patrol car. They moved slowly toward her window, their faces serious. One of them, a tall man wearing dark sunglasses, knocked on her window. Aramis lowered it and greeted them politely, her voice steady even though she felt uneasy inside. "Good morning, officers," she said. "Is something wrong?" The taller officer asked for her driver's license and registration. His tone was firm but not aggressive. She handed over the documents quickly, trying to stay calm. Years of working in law had taught her that being respectful was always the best approach. She asked again, "May I know why you stopped me?" The officer looked at her for a moment and said it was just a routine check. His answer didn't make sense to her. There was nothing routine about stopping a car without any clear reason. The second officer stood a little behind, looking around but saying nothing. The silence between them felt heavy. Aramis took a quiet breath and reminded herself to stay composed. She had faced tough questions in courtrooms before. She could handle this too. While one officer walked back to their patrol car with her license, the other stayed by her window. He asked where she worked and where she was heading. His tone seemed casual, but his eyes kept studying her face. She answered each question politely. When she said she worked as a state attorney, he blinked and his expression changed. The polite smile returned to his face, but it looked forced, almost embarrassed. The minutes felt long. Aramis could hear her own heartbeat and the sound of cars passing by in the distance. She thought about how strange it was that even someone who served the law could be treated this way. It wasn't fear she felt, it was disbelief. She hadn't done anything wrong, yet she was standing here waiting for answers that didn't exist. She looked in her mirror and saw the officer at the patrol car talking quickly to his partner. Their gestures were nervous, their movements hurried. Something had clearly changed after they checked her information. Aramis didn't move, didn't speak. She just waited, her hands resting quietly on her lap. A few moments later, the officer returned with her documents in hand. His voice had softened. "Everything's fine, ma'am. We just wanted to make sure everything was in order," he said. He tried to sound calm, but Aramis could hear the small tremor in his tone. She took her license and registration back and looked him in the eyes. There was no anger there, only quiet strength. "Thank you, officer," she said simply. Then she started her car and pulled away slowly. As she drove off, she could still see the flashing lights in her mirror fading into the distance. The air felt heavier now and her music no longer sounded peaceful. She kept thinking about what had just happened. She hadn't broken any laws, yet she was stopped. Her plate was a government plate. Her name, once entered into the system, would clearly show who she was. So why the stop? When she reached a red light, she rested her hand on the steering wheel and took a deep breath. She wasn't someone who liked to draw attention to herself, but she also couldn't ignore what had just happened. If this could happen to her, a state attorney, what did ordinary citizens go through every day? The thought stayed with her as the light turned green and she drove on. At home, she parked her car in the driveway and sat there for a moment before stepping out. Her neighborhood was quiet, the sun now setting behind the trees. She looked at her car, at the plate, and felt a strange mix of sadness and determination. She knew this incident wasn't just about her. It was about something bigger, something many people experienced but rarely spoke about. Inside her home, she took off her jacket, poured herself a glass of water, and sat at the dining table. She opened her notebook, where she usually wrote down her thoughts after a long day. For a while, she didn't write anything. She just sat there, thinking about the officers' faces, their sudden change of tone when they learned who she was. The memory replayed in her mind like a short film. The flashing lights, the firm voices, The uneasy silence. The quick apology. It wasn't fear she felt, it was clarity. She now understood that even authority didn't always protect you from being judged too soon. Her phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from a colleague reminding her of an upcoming meeting. She replied briefly, but her mind was still on the roadside encounter. She wondered if she should report it or if she should let it go. But letting it go didn't feel right. Not because she wanted to make trouble, but because she wanted to make things right. That night, she stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker. She thought about the law she worked so hard to uphold, the justice she always believed in, and how fragile that justice sometimes seemed in moments like these. She promised herself that she would find out why she had been stopped. Not for revenge, but for truth. It had been just another drive home, but it turned into something that changed her view forever. That single stop showed her how easily assumptions could replace fairness. As she finally went to bed, her heart was calm, but her mind was awake. She didn't know that this small moment on a quiet Orlando street would soon start a conversation far bigger than she ever expected. It was the beginning of something important, a reminder that truth, when spoken calmly and clearly, can open eyes and change hearts. The next morning started with quiet rain tapping softly against Aramis's window. She got ready for work as usual, trying to keep her thoughts away from what had happened the previous day. But as she looked at herself in the mirror, she could still see the same question in her eyes. Why did they stop her when she had done nothing wrong? She brushed it aside, picked up her briefcase, and headed out. The drive to her office was peaceful this time. The same streets, the same turns, yet everything felt different. Every flashing light or police car she saw now reminded her of that moment on the roadside. At her office, the day began like any other. Files were stacked high on her desk. Her assistant greeted her with a list of meetings, and the phone didn't stop ringing. Still, her mind kept drifting back to the stop. She wasn't angry. She was curious. Something about the officer's behavior didn't feel right. They had called it a routine check, but their reaction after learning who she was had said much more than their words ever could. Later that afternoon, as she was leaving a meeting, her phone buzzed. It was a message from one of her colleagues who had heard a rumor about her being pulled over the day before. "Is it true?" the message read. Aramis stared at the screen for a moment, thinking. She hadn't told anyone. How did people already know? She typed back carefully, saying yes, but it wasn't a big deal. Still, she knew it had already started spreading. When she reached her car in the parking lot, she paused before getting in. She looked at the government license plate, shiny and official, and thought about what one of the officers had said, that the system hadn't recognized it. She worked with law enforcement often enough to know that wasn't how the system worked. Her plate was registered, her name was clear, and there was no valid reason for the stop. She realized there might be something more to it. That evening, she sat down at her desk at home and decided to take the first step toward finding answers. She drafted a formal request to obtain the body camera footage from the officers who had stopped her. As a state attorney, she had every right to see the recording. It wasn't about creating conflict. She just wanted to know the truth. After sending the request, she leaned back in her chair and sighed. She didn't know what she would find, but she was ready to face it. Days passed, and Aramis continued her regular work. She met with judges, reviewed cases, and spoke with her team. But deep down, the memory of the stop never fully left her mind. Sometimes while driving, she caught herself glancing at the mirrors more often than before. The sound of sirens, even far away, made her heart tighten for a moment, before she reminded herself to stay calm. She told herself she had done nothing wrong, that she had nothing to fear. A few days later, she received a call from the police department's records office. The footage she had requested was ready for review. The voice on the phone was polite but sounded cautious, as if the person already knew what she was looking for. Aramis thanked them and arranged to pick up a copy the next morning. That night, she couldn't sleep well. She lay awake thinking about what the video might show. Maybe it would explain everything, or maybe it would raise even more questions. Either way, she wanted the truth. The next day, she arrived at the records office wearing her usual calm expression. The clerk behind the counter recognized her immediately and handed her a sealed envelope containing a USB drive. "Everything you requested is here, ma'am," he said quietly. Aramis thanked him and left. Back in her office, she closed the door, inserted the drive into her computer, and pressed play. The footage began with the sound of a car engine and static from the radio. She could see the two officers sitting in their patrol car before they pulled her over. They were chatting casually until one of them looked at the screen inside their vehicle that displayed license plate information. He scanned her plate number, and when the results came back clean, there was a short pause. Then, for reasons unexplained, he decided to follow her anyway. A few seconds later, the flashing lights came on. Aramis watched as her own car slowed down and pulled to the side. She could hear the officers talking before they got out. "Let's just see what she's up to," one of them said. It wasn't a reason, just a thought spoken aloud. The rest of the video was exactly as she remembered. The knock on her window, her calm greeting, the questions, and the moment everything changed when she said she was the state attorney. The shift in their tone was clear. Their confidence faded instantly. She heard one of them whisper quietly to the other, "She's the state attorney, man." The second officer replied in a low voice, "Are you serious?" Then came the awkward smiles and quick excuses. Aramis paused the video and sat back in her chair. For a moment, she didn't move. She felt a mix of emotions, disappointment, sadness, and a quiet determination. The video confirmed what she had felt all along. There had been no reason for the stop. It wasn't about a license plate or a system error. It was about an assumption, an instant judgment made before knowing who she was. She played the video again, this time taking notes. She wasn't doing it out of anger, but because she wanted a clear record of what had happened. She wanted facts, not emotions. By the time she finished, the room was silent except for the soft hum of her computer. Later that evening, she decided to talk to her close friend and colleague Maria about what she had discovered. They met at a small cafe near the courthouse. Over coffee, Aramis told her everything, the stop, the excuses, and the footage. Maria listened carefully, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You?" she said quietly. "They pulled you over for no reason?" Aramis nodded. "Yes, and I can't stop thinking about what that means. If this can happen to me, imagine what others go through every day." Maria sighed. "Are you going to report it?" Aramis thought for a moment before replying. "Not yet. I'm not trying to start a fight. I just want the truth to be known." When she got home that night, she sat by the window watching the rain fall again. She remembered the officer's nervous face, his quick apology, and his shaking hands when he realized who she was. It wasn't about revenge for her. It was about awareness. It was about showing that even people in power could face unfair treatment. The rain outside began to fade, and a quiet peace filled the room. Aramis turned off the lights and sat in the dark for a while, letting her thoughts settle. She didn't know it yet, but her decision to look into this small event would soon spark something much larger, a conversation that would reach far beyond her own experience. For now, she was just one woman who had been stopped for no reason, who had stayed calm, asked questions, and found the truth. But she also knew this was only the beginning. Something deep inside her told her that what she had discovered would soon touch many lives, because truth has a way of traveling, and once it starts, it never really stops. The morning sun rose slowly, painting the sky a soft orange as Aramis walked into her office with the same calm confidence she always carried. Yet inside she felt different. The video she had watched the night before kept replaying in her mind. The way the officers had spoken, the way their voices changed once they realized who she was, it was all so clear. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was something deeper. She had always believed in justice, in fairness, in the idea that everyone should be treated equally under the law. But that moment on the road had shaken that belief in a quiet, powerful way. She spent the morning going through her regular work, meeting with her team, reviewing case files and signing documents, but she couldn't focus. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the footage. Around noon, she closed the folder in front of her and leaned back in her chair. She decided it was time to act. Aramis called one of her trusted investigators, a man named Leonard who had worked with her for years. He was known for being honest, calm, and detail-oriented. When he entered her office, she explained everything that had happened, from the stop to the video she had seen. Leonard listened carefully, not interrupting once. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "Do you still have the footage?" he asked. "Yes," she said, pulling the USB drive from her drawer. "I want you to go through it. I need a full report. I want every detail written down. Time, words, tone, everything." Leonard took the drive and assured her he would handle it personally. "You're doing the right thing," he said before leaving. Sometimes the truth needs to be shown, not just told. After he left, Aramis stood by her window and looked down at the city streets below. Cars moved, people walked, life went on as usual. But she knew this moment was more than just a personal experience. It was a reflection of something that happened to many people who didn't have her position, her title, or her platform. That afternoon, she received an email from the communications department. Someone from a local news outlet had reached out, asking about the stop. Word was spreading faster than she expected. She hadn't spoken publicly about it yet, but people were talking. Her name carried weight in the city, and even small rumors drew attention. She didn't respond to the reporter immediately. Instead, she decided to wait until Leonard finished his report. She wanted facts before she said a single word. In her heart, she knew that the truth, once spoken clearly, could make an impact, but only if she handled it wisely. 2 days later, Leonard came back with the report. He placed a printed document on her desk filled with notes and timestamps. "I reviewed everything," he said. "There's no valid reason for that stop. They said the system didn't recognize your plate, but according to the log, the scan returned clean results. They just ignored it." Aramis read through the pages quietly. Every line confirmed what she already knew. The report showed that the stop wasn't random. It was a mistake, one that revealed a much larger issue. She thanked Leonard and told him to keep a copy for official records. Later that evening, she sat in her office long after everyone else had left. The building was quiet, and only the sound of rain outside broke the silence. She opened her laptop and began writing. Not a formal statement, not a complaint, just her thoughts. She wrote about what it felt like to be stopped for no reason, about the fear and confusion that ordinary people must feel when it happens to them. She wrote about the importance of respect, of fairness, and of understanding that authority should protect, not intimidate. By the time she finished, it was past midnight. She read over her words and realized something. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about trust, the kind of trust that connects people with the law, and how easily it can be broken. The next morning, she decided to share her experience, not as a victim, but as a voice for change. She arranged a small press meeting in her office building, inviting only a few reporters she trusted. When they arrived, she greeted them calmly as she always did. Cameras were set up, microphones placed on the table. When everything was ready, she began to speak. Her voice was steady, warm, and honest. "A few days ago," she said, "I was stopped by 2 police officers while driving home. There was no traffic violation, no broken law. When I asked why, I was told it was a routine check. But after reviewing the body camera footage, it became clear that it wasn't routine at all." The room was silent. Everyone listened closely as she continued. She didn't raise her voice or accuse anyone. Instead, she spoke with calm authority. She said that she respected law enforcement, that most officers worked hard to serve and protect. But she also said that moments like these created distance between the community and the people sworn to keep it safe. "I am not sharing this to create division," she said gently. "I am sharing it because the truth matters. Respect should never depend on who someone is. The law should be equal for everyone." Her words carried weight. She finished her statement, thanked the reporters, and walked out without taking any questions. She didn't need to say more. Her message was clear. Within hours, the story spread across news outlets and social media. People were shocked, some angry, others inspired. Many praised her calmness and courage. They called her a symbol of strength, someone who stood for fairness without bitterness. Others began sharing their own experiences of being stopped for no reason, creating a wave of stories that echoed hers. That night, Aramis sat at home, scrolling through the messages on her phone. Strangers from across the country were writing to thank her for speaking up. Some said her story gave them hope. Others said it reminded them that change could start with honesty, not anger. She smiled faintly as she read through the comments. It wasn't fame or attention she wanted, it was awareness. If people could see that even someone like her could face unfair treatment, maybe they would understand how deeply the issue ran. A few days later, she received a letter from the local police department. They acknowledged the incident and said they would review their procedures. It wasn't a full apology, but it was a start. She appreciated the gesture and hoped it would lead to something meaningful. As she placed the letter on her desk, she felt a quiet satisfaction. The experience that had begun as confusion and disbelief was now becoming something greater, a chance for change. She had faced the truth, shared it with grace, and opened a conversation that needed to happen. Outside her window, the city lights glowed softly in the night. Aramis looked out and thought about how far things had come in just a few days. She knew there would still be challenges, still be people who misunderstood her message, but she also knew something had begun. People were paying attention. For the first time since that strange morning on the roadside, she felt peace. She realized that sometimes difficult moments arrive not to break you, but to reveal your purpose. What had started as a random traffic stop was now a spark of awareness, a reminder that truth spoken calmly and clearly can travel farther than anyone expects. The story of the traffic stop spread faster than anyone expected. By the next morning, Aramis's phone was full of messages from reporters, friends, and even strangers who had seen her calm but powerful statement. Some thanked her for speaking up. Others simply wanted to know more. The news channels played the short clip of her speech over and over again, calling it the voice of quiet courage. It wasn't just another story. It was something that made people stop and think. At the courthouse, everyone was talking about it. Some of her colleagues came to her office just to shake her hand and say how proud they were. "You spoke for so many people who stay silent," one of them said softly. Aramis smiled politely and thanked them, but she didn't let it go to her head. She had never wanted fame or attention. She only wanted to share the truth and start an honest conversation. Still, she couldn't help but notice how the atmosphere around her had changed. People looked at her with admiration now, some with curiosity and a few with surprise that she had handled everything so gracefully. By the afternoon, her office received a call from the mayor's office. The mayor wanted to meet her privately. When she arrived at City Hall later that day, the mayor greeted her warmly and thanked her for her professionalism. "You've shown people how to face difficult moments with dignity," he said. "We need voices like yours in this city." Aramis appreciated his words but stayed humble. "Thank you," she replied. "All I want is fairness for everyone, no matter who they are." The mayor nodded in agreement and promised that steps would be taken to review police training and ensure that every officer understood how to handle stops with more respect and awareness. It wasn't a promise of instant change, but it was a start. As the days went by, the story reached beyond her city. People from other states started sending her letters and emails. Some were from young law students who said they looked up to her. Others were from parents who said her courage gave them hope for their children. One letter came from a woman who wrote, "When I saw you on the news, I felt seen for the first time. Thank you for speaking up without anger. You reminded us that change doesn't always come from shouting. It can come from calm truth." That line stayed with Aramis for days. Not everyone reacted positively, of course. Some people questioned her intentions or claimed she was trying to embarrass the police department, but Aramis didn't respond to criticism. She believed her actions spoke for themselves. Whenever someone asked her how she felt about the mixed opinions, she simply said, "My goal isn't to divide anyone. My goal is to build understanding." That answer silenced most arguments. A week later, the police department officially announced that they were opening an internal review of the stop. They also decided to hold new training sessions for officers to discuss communication, equality, and professionalism during traffic stops. Aramis was invited to attend as a guest speaker. She thought about it for a day before saying yes. She knew it wouldn't be easy to face officers in uniform after what she had experienced, but she wanted to make sure her message reached them directly. The day of the meeting arrived. The police headquarters was filled with officers, some senior, some young recruits, sitting quietly as she walked in. The chief of police introduced her, and then she stepped up to the front of the room. There was a long silence before she began to speak. "I know most of you here joined the force to protect people," she said softly, "and I respect that deeply. But protection starts with understanding. When someone feels unsafe during a stop, even when they've done nothing wrong, it breaks the trust that holds a community together." The room was completely silent. She continued, her voice calm but full of emotion. "I was stopped not because of something I did, but because of who someone thought I might be. The moment you forget that every person you pull over is human, someone's family, someone's friend, you risk losing what your badge truly stands for." Her words weren't harsh, but they hit deeply. Some officers shifted uncomfortably. Others looked thoughtful. One young officer raised his hand and said quietly, "Ma'am, I'm sorry that happened to you. I joined the force to help people, not to hurt them. Hearing this makes me want to do better." Aramis smiled gently. "That's exactly why I came here," she said. "So that moments like mine can turn into lessons, not anger." After her talk, the chief of police thanked her personally. He promised that new guidelines would be developed to make traffic stops more transparent and respectful. Aramis knew it would take time, but seeing genuine effort meant everything to her. She walked out of the building feeling lighter, knowing she had turned an uncomfortable moment into a meaningful dialogue. Later that evening, she appeared on a televised interview for a national news channel. The host asked her what gave her the strength to handle the situation so calmly. She smiled and replied, "When you believe in justice, you have to live it, not just talk about it. Staying calm doesn't mean staying silent. It means choosing to lead with reason instead of reaction." Her words quickly became one of the most quoted lines from the interview. People shared it online with messages of support and admiration. Within days, she was being invited to speak at universities, legal conferences, and community events. Every time she spoke with the same quiet grace, focusing not on blame but on understanding. She wanted people to know that lasting change only came through unity and education, not anger or fear. Despite all the attention, Aramis stayed grounded. She still went to work every morning, still handled her cases, and still walked the same streets she always had. Sometimes people stopped her in public just to thank her or shake her hand. Once a young girl approached her shyly outside a cafe and said, "You're the lady from the news. My mom said you're brave." Aramis knelt down slightly, smiled, and said, "Bravery isn't about being loud. It's about standing up for what's right even when it's hard." The girl grinned and nodded before running back to her mother. That moment filled Aramis's heart with warmth. One evening, she received a call from one of the two officers who had pulled her over. His voice was quiet and nervous. He said he wanted to apologize personally. He told her that watching the video afterward had made him realize how his actions had looked from her point of view. "It was never my intention to make you feel uncomfortable," he said. "I've learned from it and I'll do better." Aramis listened patiently and replied kindly, "I appreciate your honesty. Growth begins when we face our mistakes." The call ended with a sense of peace that she hadn't felt since that day. It was a simple apology, but it meant more to her than he probably realized. As the months went by, small but visible changes began to appear across the department. Officers started engaging more politely with drivers. Community meetings became more open and friendly. People who had once been afraid to speak started sharing their stories. It was slow progress, but it was progress nonetheless. One night, as she sat on her porch watching the quiet street, Aramis thought back to that first moment. The flashing lights, the confusion, the fear, and how it had all transformed into something meaningful. She had turned an unfair experience into a movement for awareness and respect. The world hadn't completely changed yet, but she had helped it take a small step in the right direction. She smiled softly to herself, realizing that true leadership often begins when you least expect it. Sometimes life places you in uncomfortable situations not to test your strength but to reveal it. The road that once frightened her had now become a symbol of courage and change. And in that calm evening air, she felt thankful, not for what had happened, but for what it had taught her and the world around her. Weeks turned into months, and the story that had once shocked the city slowly became a symbol of quiet transformation. People still talked about the moment when the state attorney had been pulled over for no reason, but now they spoke of it with respect instead of outrage. It was no longer just a headline. It had become a reminder of how one calm voice could bring light to an entire community. Aramis continued her work as usual, but everywhere she went, people greeted her with kindness. Some smiled from afar, others stopped her just to say thank you. She always responded with the same warm politeness, never acting above anyone. To her, every thank you was proof that honesty and calm courage could still touch hearts in a noisy world. One crisp morning, she arrived at her office early. The sun was rising over the courthouse, casting golden light across the steps. She stood there for a moment, breathing in the cool air. Her heart felt peaceful. Inside her office, the desk was piled with files, as it always was, but among the papers was a small white envelope with no name. She opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Dear Ms. Ayala," it began, "I'm a young law student who watched your story on television. I've always wanted to believe that the law could change lives, but sometimes I felt discouraged seeing how unfair the world can be. Then I saw you. You didn't shout. You didn't accuse. You just told the truth. You reminded me why I chose this path. Thank you for helping me believe again." Aramis smiled as she finished reading. She placed the letter inside her journal, where she kept notes about the lessons life had taught her. That letter, simple and heartfelt, meant more to her than any award or public praise. It showed her that her words had reached the next generation, the ones who would carry justice forward after her. Later that day, she attended a city event focused on rebuilding trust between the police and the public. Community leaders, officers, students, and residents all gathered in a large hall, filled with laughter and chatter. Aramis sat quietly in the second row, listening as people shared their experiences. One older woman stood up and said, "Before all this, I used to be afraid when I saw police lights. But now things feel different. They talk to us more, they listen. I think your story made them see us." Hearing that brought tears to Aramis's eyes, though she quickly blinked them away. It wasn't about her. It was about everyone in that room realizing that small moments of truth could bring big changes. When it was her turn to speak, she walked to the podium with her calm and steady posture. "Change doesn't happen overnight," she said softly, looking at the crowd. "It happens when people listen to each other with open hearts. What happened to me could have been forgotten, but because all of you chose to care, it became something meaningful. It's proof that even a small spark of understanding can light a path forward." Her words were met with applause, but she didn't bask in it. She stepped down quietly and sat back in her seat, smiling as others continued to share. She could see how the mood in the room had shifted from frustration to hope. People weren't blaming anymore. They were connecting, finding ways to move forward together. That was exactly what she had hoped for. After the event, the police chief approached her. He looked tired but sincere. "You changed how we see things," he said. "We've started new workshops, new community meetings. Some of our younger officers say they joined this job because they saw how you handled what happened." Aramis thanked him with a gentle nod. "I'm glad to hear that," she said. "It means the message reached where it needed to." In the following weeks, she continued her quiet mission of guiding change. She met with schools, spoke to young people, and visited community centers. She talked about fairness, patience, and the importance of kindness in positions of power. She reminded them that leadership wasn't about authority. It was about responsibility. Everywhere she went, people listened closely, because her story wasn't one of anger or fear. It was one of dignity and transformation. One afternoon, as she was leaving a small town hall meeting, she saw a familiar face waiting by her car. It was the young police officer who had called her months earlier to apologize. He looked more confident now, less nervous. He greeted her respectfully and said, "I just wanted you to know that I've been training new recruits. I tell them about that day not to embarrass anyone, but to show how much a simple moment can teach. I tell them to remember that behind every driver is a person." Aramis smiled kindly. "That's the best outcome I could have hoped for," she said. "Keep doing that. You're helping to build a better future." As he left, she stood there for a while, thinking about how far things had come. What had begun as an unfair stop had now turned into a chain of lessons, spreading through people she had never even met. It made her realize something important. Sometimes, the hardest experiences in life happen not to hurt us, but to teach us how to guide others. One weekend, she finally took a break from work and drove to a nearby lake just outside the city. The water was calm, reflecting the blue sky above. Sitting on a bench, she watched families laughing, children feeding ducks, and couples walking by hand in hand. It was peaceful, quiet, and real. She thought about how much her life had changed over the past few months. She had gone from confusion and disbelief to clarity and peace. She no longer replayed that traffic stop in her head. Instead, she saw it as a turning point, a reminder that light could rise from any shadow if met with grace. As she sat there, a group of students approached her. They recognized her and asked if they could take a picture together. One of them, a young woman with bright eyes, said, "Ma'am, I want to become a state attorney one day. Your story taught me that strength doesn't always come from power. It comes from truth." Aramis laughed softly and said, "That's exactly right. Promise me you'll carry that truth with you wherever you go." The girl nodded eagerly. After taking the photo, they thanked her and walked away, their voices full of excitement and dreams. The evening sun began to set over the lake. coloring the sky with soft pink and gold. Aramis stayed until the last light faded, feeling grateful for everything, the good and the bad. She had learned that even moments that feel unfair can become lessons that help others grow. Her story wasn't about blame, it was about balance. It showed that when truth is met with calm strength, it has the power to heal instead of divide. When she returned home that night, she placed the letter from the law student on her desk and smiled. She knew that the journey wasn't over. It had simply taken on a new meaning. She would keep using her voice to promote fairness, kindness, and understanding. She would keep reminding people that respect is the foundation of justice, and that the smallest act of empathy can change an entire community. Before turning off the lights, she looked out her window one last time. The city lights shimmered in the distance, and for the first time in a long while, she felt that everything was in the right place. She whispered quietly to herself. It started with fear, but it ended with faith. Her story had begun with flashing lights on a dark street, but it ended with a peaceful glow that reached far beyond that moment. It reminded everyone who heard it that truth spoken softly can still echo loudly, and that kindness, no matter how small, can truly change the world.